Hi, I'm Carolyn Miles. I'm the CEO and president of Save the Children, and I'm very thankful for you joining us today. This is our 2012 Motherhood Interactive Video Conference, and today we released our 13th annual State of the World's Mothers Report, and among other things, that report ranks the best and worst places in the world to be a mom. So I'm really delighted to be joined today by an exciting global panel of mothers from different corners of the globe. And I'll introduce them in a second. And on behalf of Save the Children, I want to thank our panelists. Today is really about a shared experience of being a mom. I'm a mom myself of 3 kids, and you'll be talking to moms and understanding what it's like to be a mother in different parts of the world. If you'd like to sign a petition after you listen to this audio conference and video conference, we invite you to do that at www.savethechildren.net. So let me introduce our panel with us today. First of all, Arianna Huffington will be joining us a little bit later. She'll be coming in by audio, and so we'll let you know when that happens. But with me right now is Jaishree Silva, who is calling in from Nigeria, and she is a Nigerian film star. Say hi again, Jaishree. Hi. Thank you.
Hello.
Then we have Shabana Azmi, who is calling in from India, and Shabana is a Bollywood star there in India, so she's joining us as well. Thank you, Shabana.
Hi, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you.
And then finally, I have Jaishree Misra, who is a very notable author from India, and she's with us as well.
Hello, pleased to be here.
And again, I'm Carolyn Miles, and I'm the CEO of Save the Children. So I'd like to just give a few highlights from the report before we actually begin taking questions. And we are taking live questions today, and you can do that by asking questions via Twitter with the hashtag #HiddenCrisis, which refers to malnutrition. So we hope that we've already got a lot of questions that are already flowing through. We hope that you'll ask your question as well. So let me first tell you about some of the key findings of the State of the World's Mothers Report. Again, the 13th annual report that was just released today. First of all, we once again looked at the best and worst places to be a mom. We looked at 165 countries all around the world, both developed countries and developing countries. And we found that, and we've used indicators that are around child and maternal health, around education rates for women, around health policies and practices for women. And we found that Norway is in fact the best place in the world to be a mother. And Niger is the worst place to be a mother. And Niger actually replaces Afghanistan for the first time in a couple of years. Afghanistan has been at the bottom of those rankings the last couple of years. This year, the United States ranks 25th, just to let you know another tidbit from this report. There's a long way to go. The U.S. did move up 6 spots this year, but 25th is not at the top of the developed world rankings at all. And a woman in the U.S. is actually 7 times more likely to die in childbirth than in Italy or other developed countries like Ireland. So just sharing a couple of things from the report. We also looked in the report at the hidden crisis of malnutrition and the issues of malnutrition for kids and how it affects both mothers before they give birth and when they give birth, and also children. So that has a big impact in the report this year, and we really looked at that issue. Save the Children also notes that sub-Saharan Africa continues to be one of the hardest places to be a mom, and up to 20% of women there are classified as excessively thin. So again, this issue of malnutrition, very thin moms don't have healthy babies, so that's a big issue, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and also South Asia. So the report is really full of information, and a whole lot of information about nutrition. We talk about things like the life-saving 6, things that every mom can do to make sure her baby has a healthy start in life. Breastfeeding is one of the most important things that moms can do as part of this Life Saving 6. We think that we could actually save 1 million children around the world if moms would exclusively breastfeed for the first 6 months. Now, that is not an easy thing to do, and our panelists will actually talk a little bit about that. But let me just conclude before we ask our first question. Having visited Save the Children's work from Afghanistan to Ethiopia to Bangladesh, all around the world, I've met many of the moms that are going through the challenges of raising their children in very difficult circumstances, and very different ones from my own experience. And we'll talk about that as well today from our mothers. But our Mothers Index reveals that there's a lot to do in many countries around the world for moms, making it easier to be a mother and making it a better place to be a mom. And again, please send your questions to #HiddenCrisis. And we're going to, at this point, open it up to the floor. And I want to ask the first question. Actually, we're getting these live right now. So let me ask the first question to Shabana. So Shabana, when will India's wealth help India's moms and kids? So I think this question is really focused on the inequalities in places like India. And how do you think that we can make sure that there's less of a gap between wealthy moms in India and poor moms in India? Can you talk a little bit about that? And also tell us a little bit from your own experience of being a mother in India. Shabana.
Well, firstly, it comes as a huge shock to me that on the one hand, India has a woman president and several important women in very important positions, and yet the fact is that the number of women we lose due to pregnancy-related issues in 1 week in India is more than in all of Europe for a whole year. In other words, it means that the number of women we lose due to pregnancy in 1 year is equivalent to having 400 airplane crashes a year. Can you imagine what would happen if that were to be the case? Governments would fall, but because it's poor rural women who are dying, nobody is paying slightest attention. We are 3 years away from the goals all of us had committed to, MDG, and I can't see anything happening because we lack political will. And the only answer is to take this up on a priority. And we have shown cases where, for instance, in Bihar, the government took it on itself and really supplied in the form of syrup essential nutrients to children and managed to actually save them. So it's all there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. How you do it is there, but it requires political will. It also requires putting in skilled health workers at the front lines. I know of a very tiny organization called Save a Mother that works in 250 villages in UP, and they have been able to bring down maternal mortality rates from 640 to 100,000 women, which is the national average, in less than 2 years to 62 amongst about 100,000 women. Now it's there. It can be done with very little money as long as you have political will. To me, that is the answer. The fact that India needs to understand that if her progress means such extreme inequalities, India will never be able to solve the problem or become a global player or be able to, because Gandhiji had told us that unless you reach out to the poorest of the poor and the last poor woman, we cannot call ourselves a civilized nation.
Shabana, I think that was a great answer. You brought up two important points. I think one, the political will issue, and that is such a key critical factor in many of these countries that are at the bottom of the list. And the other is the need for community health workers, because again, these are rural women for the most part who don't have the political clout, first of all, and who are kind of at the very end of the health system, or really they're way past the end of the health system in many of these countries. So great points there. Let me turn to Joke, I think is still on the line, from Nigeria. Joke,
Yes,
talk to me a little bit about the situation in Nigeria, and specifically for moms and the critical issues that they face in terms of giving their babies a head start around this issue of malnutrition. So if you could talk a little bit about that, it would be great.
Well, Nigeria ranks second to the last, actually, in the index of less developed countries that are, that are suffering from this problem of malnutrition. 41% of our children are stunted, which is about 11 million of our children. And I think the problem is poverty, because most of the time a mother is thinking of her child being full, not being. It's not so much that the food is nutritious as the child being satisfied, being full. So you're not looking at nutritious food. You're looking at food that will feel that that will save off hunger. That's number one. Number two, like I think it was Jaishree that just spoke, or was it? Yeah, so Jaishree that just spoke.
It was Shabana.
Or was it Shabana? Oh, sorry, Shabana that just spoke. We also have a problem of political will here in Nigeria, because there was a situation where we had a problem with iodine in our food, and so the government went out and made sure that practically every single household had iodized salt. So it's something that is possible to do. It is possible to get all mothers to breastfeed their children, and to also try and provide health workers, qualified health workers, to help with the delivery of children, to help with the sustenance of children between the ages of 1 and 5. It is possible, but then it is a matter of political will.
Great. And Joke, you brought up another key point in this issue of malnutrition, which is micronutrients, and making sure that young children get micronutrients so they can absorb the nutrients from food. That's really an important part, and we point out in the report that as a key for these life-saving six, along with breastfeeding, as you said. So let me turn to Jaishree and take another question. Jaishree, what's the role, this is a good question for you, what's the role of an author, do you think, in solving the problems for moms and kids? So you're a notable author from India. What do you think is a role that you can play in India? And please do also talk about the issue of what it's like to be a mom there and experiences that you have.
I've always believed that because I write fiction, I'm a novelist, I sort of try and keep agendas out of my writing, I do have to admit. But when you as an individual begin to care deeply about issues, and obviously as a human being you do care deeply about things these horrifying figures that you read in the newspapers and just things you see on the street here in India, obviously some of those concerns start to creep in. I find I can't help it. So my books have they've addressed motherhood on many different levels. And my very first book was, and this is because you asked me about my own personal experience of motherhood. My very first book explores the issues around having a child with special needs, because that is my experience. I have a daughter with special needs. She's now nearly 30 actually, but I wrote the book when she was about 13 or 14. So some of those issues were still that I'd faced as a young mother were still fresh in my mind when I wrote the book. So it creeps in. I don't think as a novelist I can go out there and try and change the world by campaigning through my novels. But it's in some ways it offers you a more subtle, easy way into changing people's hearts and minds, and I'm quite aware of that, and I do try and use it as much as I can. And I think the problem, reflecting back to the first question that you asked, Shabana and Joke, living in a country like India where you have such a huge disparity between the haves and the have-nots, it plays on your mind all the time, because it's a sort of daily reality that you face as you're traveling in your car and you see a mother with a baby begging at a traffic light. But there's only so much I think that us as individuals, and as very fortunate individuals, can do. So I think each of us, many of us do our best in small ways. But in the end, it is, as both our previous speakers have said, it's down to governments if you want to really effect change. The systems are all in place. We just need to make sure that they get going.
Yeah, great. And I think reinforcing that political will question. I think part of what today is obviously about is using our voices to get the word out. And I think, Jaishree, you know, have done that in a different way with your novels, which is another way to educate people about what's going on and what the world really looks like. And again, that inequality between for mothers that have so much and mothers that don't. So, and that's what today is about, is getting our voices heard and trying to get this information out. Again, if you want to send us a question, please do. It's hashtag Hidden Crisis, and I'm going to take another question live here. So this one is really about the juxtaposition of poverty and malnutrition. And actually, I'll start on this one because part of the question is, why is the U.S. not as high as Norway? So I'll take that question from the U.S. perspective, and then Joke, I'm coming to you next. But in terms of the U.S., versus Norway, the inequality right now in the United States between poor families and wealthy families, as we talked about in India, is huge. 1 in 4 children in rural America lives in poverty. 1 in 4 children in the United States lives in poverty. So that is a pretty shocking statistic, I think, for the one of the wealthiest countries certainly in the world. And that issue of malnutrition is actually a big part of what plays into the ranking of the U.S. as 25th versus where Norway is at number 1. So if we look at the child mortality rates in the United States, they are actually significantly higher than most developed countries. There's 40 developed countries that have better child mortality rates than the United States. In terms of maternal mortality, 1 in 2,100 women will die in pregnancy, so that is still quite high. And nutrition really does play a big part in this issue because it is poor moms with very low access to prenatal care, low access to counseling for nutritious food, not really being, not understanding the benefit of breastfeeding in the United States and how important that can be for kids. In the United States, we're lucky. It's not really, breastfeeding is not maybe a question of life or death like it is in developing countries where you don't have clean water, etc. But it really can make a big difference for babies and for moms. So this issue of nutrition is at the heart of the low, relative to most developed countries, the low rankings in the United States. And I think when people see those factors in the U.S., they are pretty shocked about them. So Joke, let me turn to you and talk a little bit more about Niger and Nigeria and what is going on there in terms of programs that are focused on poor moms, and what do you think that is working there in Nigeria? What's making a difference there for mothers?
There is a campaign, a breastfeeding campaign that is on. It just needs to be bigger and spread wider, and also be more accessible to the people who need it. Because I mean, there's no point producing posters and things that a lot of poor women, one, cannot read. And the other thing is that they do not even identify with whoever is on the poster. You know, one of the biggest brands that has come out of Nigeria in the recent times is Nollywood, and so using a lot of Nollywood faces to portray the part of these mothers helps, because there's an immediate identification with the populace. So more of that needs to be done. More, it's also a case of education of these of the poor in the society who are in the majority, making them understand that breastfeeding your child for as long as possible. Most people try and do it for 3 months, but even if you can do it for longer before you add on the processed milk, the better. The better for the child, and then it's also for the mothers too. And this is where the health workers come in, because they need to help with the education of the mothers. I hope that I've answered your question and I haven't deviated.
Great. And Joke, in terms of your own
Yes.
experiences there, have you or friends of yours had difficult births in Nigeria? How does that generally go for your friends and associates?
Well, the thing is that it's you see, when you belong, it's this situation of the haves and the have nots really, because the
Yeah.
medical services that are what's the word now, that are accessible to the have. They have everything, you understand. But then you now
Yeah.
have the medical services that are basically mostly government services, that hospitals. They do not. There's so many things that they are overstaffed, and they're understaffed and underpaid, and then they lack so many facilities. So any mother who goes to those facilities really doesn't get the best care. And then when we're talking about the rural areas where there is a huge need for healthcare givers, primary healthcare givers in the rural areas, there's a dearth of those. They're not enough. And so you will find that in such situations, whether it's in government hospitals, which right now they are on strike in any case, so you're not really going to get any attention from any of the government hospitals. And if you're a poor person, you cannot afford the private hospitals, so you're left to having, if you're having your child, you're left to having your child on your own. And then if you have a difficult birth, it can be extremely difficult here in Nigeria, because sometimes they expect you to pay before you get any service. So no matter how rich you are, sometimes you find that you sometimes lose your children at birth, because let's say you go into labor at 10 a.m., at 2 a.m. in the morning, 3 a.m. in the morning. Who keeps much money in their houses at that time of the day? Do you understand what I'm saying? And yet nobody will attend to you unless you pay some money. You understand? And
Right.
so a lot of people have lost their children that way, because they have not been able to pay for service when they arrive at the hospital.
So Joke, let me just
Yes,
let me just interrupt for a second. Thank
yes.
you, Joke from Nigeria. I think we might have Arianna Huffington on the phone with us.
Yes,
Arianna, are you there?
Okay.
yes, I'm on the phone. And first of all, congratulations on the release of this incredibly important report.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for the Huffington Post featuring the report, and our listeners can go there to learn more about the report. Arianna, I know we've got you in between running off to other things, so I wanted to make sure we asked you some of the real-time questions that we're getting right now. So I'm going to ask you a question that's coming in from Paul that says, "Man cannot live on tweets alone. Do you think online campaigns can make a difference in the actual real world?"
I do, because they raise awareness, and a lot of people do not know, for example, how many mothers around the world face hardships during pregnancy, during childbirth, and especially during the first 1,000 days of being a mom. So I think raising awareness of the crisis is the first step to action. But I agree with Paul that awareness is not enough, and that's why everything we are doing in our global motherhood section that Johnson & Johnson sponsors on the Huffington Post is geared towards action and providing people both with the data, the stories, but also opportunities to act and make a difference.
Great. And maybe, Arianna, you can talk a little bit about what you think really unites mothers. This report really talks about the differences in terms of what it's like to be a mom. You know, number one country is Norway, the bottom of the list is Niger. But what do you think unites mothers around the world? What's the power of motherhood that you think about?
Well, I know I became a mother late in life. I was 38 when I had my first daughter and 40 when I had my second. So I can say from personal experience how much it changed me, how much it sort of increased my capacity for empathy and compassion and a sense of solidarity with mothers everywhere in the world, whatever their circumstances. I feel that those of us in the West who have a much easier time in terms of childbirth and pregnancy, still are plagued with guilt around being working moms, as most of us are. And therefore, the issues around motherhood start with the crisis that those at the bottom of the ladder that the report shows are experiencing, but continues in different emotional and psychological degrees across every country. And at the same time, there is no greater joy for me in my life than becoming a mother. And I feel being involved in this cause is just an extension of the significance this has for me.
Great. Well, thank you, and we really do thank you for your support of this report. We have moms here from Nigeria and from India on the phone with us, so I'm going to call on, I'm going to go back to Jaishree and ask you, Jaishree, to talk a little bit about your experience in India. And we've been talking about the issue of taking care of your children through that first 1,000 days and how important that is. And maybe a little bit of your experience in India and what it's like is breastfeeding something that's accepted in India? Is it easy to do in India? Are there, places where moms can go if they go back to work? What is that like? Because that's such a key critical issue for mothers and for babies in that first 1,000 days.
Well, in my own personal experience, as I mentioned, my daughter has special needs. So one very early indication of that was the fact that she could not breastfeed. That was obviously, we didn't realize at the time it was because she had a severe learning disability. Because she looked, on the face of it, she looked like any other baby, and she was, squalling and so on, just as babies do. But she refused to feed. And looking back, I remember being very privileged, very supported through the whole thing. I was surrounded by nurses, surrounded by very loving mother, grandmother, husband, and so on. But the fact that when my baby wasn't feeding, I remember thinking, and now looking back, I know how easy it would have been to just give up. There was formula available, there were all sorts of things on offer, and I could have just given up. But however tempted I was at the time, the nurses at the hospital absolutely refused to let me do that. So I think consciousness of how important breastfeeding is alive and well in India, and at all levels. I don't think that should be in any doubt. And so for me, breast pumps were brought along, and I was, expelling my breast milk into cups and bottles, and then that was being fed to the baby to my daughter who could actually cope with the teat of a bottle. So that was my own experience. But in terms of the wider picture in India, I would say, to be fair to Indian practices, by and large, breastfeeding is very accepted, is not a huge issue in terms of women having to find somewhere special to go. That's actually quite a Western notion, I think, is having to have special rooms and areas where mothers have to kind of duck into the dark and kind of pull open their blouses and feed their babies. In India, it's seen as a very natural thing, and that has to be good. So people now tend to get a little startled when you have mom lifting up her sari and sort of yanking her blouse open and sticking her nipple into the baby's mouth. This kind of sensitivity is growing now, but actually, and especially in the more rural parts of India, it's fine. It's expected if you're a new mom, you're expected to breastfeed your child. And I think the traditional Indian garb, actually makes it quite easy to do so, because we wear a sari that has a bit of fabric covering the chest. All you have to do is open the blouse underneath and tuck your baby in and cover yourself, and your modesty is intact because of the veil in front. So in that respect, I think India is actually quite well off, and I would even go as far as to say better off than young mothers are in many Western countries. But there are a whole raft of other issues to do with malnutrition, to do with traditional practices that need sort of changing in some way, to do with hygiene and sanitation and all those issues as well. But I'm aware that I'm going off subject now, so.
Okay, thank you, Jaishree. I'm not sure, Arianna, if you're still on with us. We've a lot of beeps going off, and no, maybe not. Shabana, are you still with us? All right, and we're gonna see if Joke is still with us as well.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay, Joke, I want you to talk a little bit about Africa, if you could. Niger is at the bottom of the ranking this year, and obviously there are lots of things that influence that ranking. Right now in Niger, as you probably know, there's a drought. There is a growing hunger crisis in Niger, and that's certainly going to have a real impact on mothers and children there. But can you talk a little bit about Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa and some of the things that you think really need to change there? We've talked about political will, but what other things do you think in terms of either education or different kinds of programs that you've seen work in Nigeria? What else do you think could be done in a place like Niger that really has an awful lot of issues in terms of both natural disasters as well as real infrastructure and poverty issues?
I think for us in Africa, yes, we have a lot of poverty issues, but we also have a lot of emerging issues as well. A lot of countries that are emerging into the 21st century. So there's this tension between what are the cultural practices that we grew up with, and what are the practices of the 21st century that are would assist us in our emergence. For places like Niger, for example, now because they are coming out of they have an immense food crisis in Niger. We also have a food crisis here in Nigeria as well. And a lot of it for us here, in Nigeria, comes from our misuse of land, really, where we're not using our land properly as for farming as we should. There are not enough people who understand the new technology for farming. There's not enough preservation of food and all that. When we're looking at a place like Niger, the crisis is monumental, and of course when you have mothers who themselves are malnourished, it's a bit difficult now to expect these mothers to be able to nourish their own children as well, So I think there needs to be a concerted effort on all concerned, that in places in the world where there is a crisis, there should be support from places in the world where there isn't.
Yeah,
Do you understand
absolutely.
what I mean? Yes, I mean, you know, I mean, I would imagine that that is the first step, and then of course education, awareness of what is it that gives nutritious food. For us here in Nigeria, for example, we have there's this food. It's called gari,
Mm-hmm.
cassava. It's
Yeah.
cassava. It's a staple. Now, if you have gari with groundnut, now gari is carbohydrate. You have groundnut, which is protein, and it's protein and oil. Do you understand? I mean, protein and fat. You know, so it's balanced. Also, you know, you have a balanced meal right there. But you know, people are more likely to just take the cassava and not take the groundnut with it.
Right.
Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying? So that what we're
Yes.
saying is that there are so many kinds of food that we can eat that is not expensive, that doesn't necessarily involve meat. For a lot of people, protein tends to always immediately you hear protein, you're looking at eggs, you're looking at meat, you're looking at fish. Some of that is pretty expensive. There are alternatives that are
Yeah.
not as expensive, that are even more accessible, especially if you're in a rural area.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's a great point, okay, which is to make sure that mothers know what the local nutritious foods are. And Save the Children does a lot
Yes,
of programs that are educating moms on just what you're talking about, using local foods, cassava and ground nuts and some local crops that are grown there that together, when you put those
exactly. Even
together,
vegetables, a
they
lot
make
of
nutritious
vegetables.
food for children, yeah. And doing that
Yeah.
after breastfeeding for the first 6 months, so introducing those complementary foods later. So, Joke, I just want to ask one more quick question, and then I'm going to come back to Jaishree, which is, you're in the entertainment business, so you're in Nollywood
Yes.
there in Nigeria. So what do you think that the entertainment industry, you talked a little bit about it earlier, but what do you think the
Yes.
entertainment industry can do there in your country to really increase awareness? I mean, obviously people love to go and watch people like you on film, and what do you think you can
Yes.
do, and you and your colleagues in your industry can do?
Well, what I believe about the entertainment industry, especially the medium of film, is that it is so powerful, and a lot of subliminal messages can be passed through film. You know, and still making it entertaining. It is so. I believe it is so easy to just pass across the messages that we need about nutrition, about good governance. First of all, even before we talk about it, you know, good governance will affect nutrition. Good
Yeah.
about good governance, about you know, the political will, about you know, I mean, there's just so many issues. It's first, even about the kind of ethics that we find in hospitals. You know, even if you have good birth attendants, even if you have good hospitals, there are some things that are just not ethical. You cannot expect someone. We had a situation yesterday here in the city in Nigeria where someone in Lagos, where someone had a dead child. I mean, she was about 2 weeks pregnant, and the child had died in her womb, and they wouldn't
Mm.
operate until they had been paid. I mean, I
Yeah.
just found that so obnoxious,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So
Got to take
these are
action.
the kind of things that. Sorry.
You've got to do what you need to do. Take action. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And these are the kind of things that we can show in our films, you know. And so the more people who are in our industry who are aware of the issues, especially writers and producers who are aware of the issues on the ground, then it would help. They can then insert it, you know, but make it will still be entertaining, not propaganda. It's
Right.
important we don't make it propaganda.
Yeah. So Jaishree, let me come back to you. And we talked before about this great inequity in India between the wealthy and poor. And obviously, when you look at these kind of statistics about mothers and children. The real issue is with poor women and poor children. How, in a place like India, do we empower poor women? What can be done to enable them to raise their voices to a higher level? Are there things that you see that are happening there that you think there need to be more of? Because that's a big part of the issue, obviously.
I think you cannot underestimate the importance of home intervention schemes. I mean, I really do applaud Save the Children for pressing away at the issue of bringing more and more health workers into the picture. Because health workers, especially if they're sourced from local communities, they almost always are from what I understand. These are women who can speak local languages and who understand local practices and can go directly to where I think the heart of the problem often lies, which is the home. And once you have a health visitor, they're called health workers more often in India. They're also called the frontline Anganwadi workers, to use the Indian government's term for them. But once you have these women who become like mother figures or sister figures going into a home, there is no better way and no more subtle a way in which change can be brought about and affected. Because what a young mother, I mean, you could take a young mother out of her home and take her to some community center somewhere and train her and teach her the best practices of feeding her baby and looking after herself and so on. But if from that point she goes back to her home and finds herself up against a whole lot of prejudices and a whole lot of negative attitudes which could come from mother-in-law, from father-in-law, from husband, from community, from society, there's really little point in doing all of that. Whereas if a health worker is allowed to go into the house, for one, they get to observe, they get to see what the issues are. If there are issues around, say, sanitation and hygiene, then those can be addressed. If there are issues around the nutrition and diet and the diet practices of the house, those can be addressed. If there's issues around the immunization, vaccination schedule of the child, that can be addressed as well. So what happens is this person goes in almost like a mix of different roles. They're a health visitor, they're a general practitioner, they're a kind of nurse of some sort, a doctor, and they bring all these kind of, what are actually very natural, common sense kind of things sometimes to bring about the best kind of change that you can really in such instances. So I would think that is really where we need to push away, is try and get more of these women, they are predominantly women, out into the most hard to reach places and the most hard to reach homes. That's where the answer lies, I think.
It's a great point, and this issue of training community health workers, because when you train one community health worker, obviously you can reach hundreds of women. So just going out and trying to get to women themselves, we do that work as well, but training a health worker actually multiplies the work that the good that you can do. So makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to just put out there, it's again #HiddenCrisis if we have a couple last questions, and I'm just going to ask answer actually one of the questions that just came in, which is around the MDGs and whether we're on track to reach the Millennium Development Goals. And I think the answer there is that certainly not everywhere. So what you see when you look at countries' progress on the Millennium Development Goals is a huge unevenness. So, and it's not just how poor those countries are. So you have some very poor countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, Malawi, that are really making progress on Millennium Development Goals around maternal mortality and child mortality, but then you have others that are not. And so the progress on MDGs is really uneven. I don't think we're going to make the child survival goal of cutting child mortality by 2/3 by 2015, but we are going to make it in a lot of countries where you wouldn't think we would make it. And the reason we're going to get there is back to this issue of political will, because in those countries we have had great progress, not just work by people like Save the Children and by mothers and by community workers, but we've also had real buy-in from the governments there. And so they've made a decision in places like Bangladesh and Nepal and Malawi, that their children don't have to die of these things, and their mothers don't have to die in childbirth. And so that's really been the real difference, I think, for countries where we will make the MDGs versus where we won't. So let me just first of all wrap this up and thank Jaishree Silva, who is our actress from Nigeria, for joining us today. Jaishree Misra, who is a notable author from India. Thank you so much. Shabana, who we lost a little bit earlier, and Arianna Huffington, who we had with us for a little while. And I want to again just ask everyone to please go to sign our petition. If you care about these issues, go to www.savethechildren.net and sign our petition. We plan to use that petition on this issue of political will and making sure that every mom and every child has a healthy and a happy start in life, and that moms really can be a great mom wherever they live. So whether they live in Norway, which is at the top of our list, or whether they live in Niger, we want to make sure that it's a great place to be a mom. So thank you, and join our petition, and I thank my guests again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.